Good morning. 1 minute to showtime. I am your host. I am Clay Douglas. And we'll have a guest coming up later into the show. Stay tuned. Hope you enjoy it.
The show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Love Talk Radio.
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is a very real prospect of a new world order. The new world order does not mean surrendering our national sovereignty or forfeiting our interests. The Constitution of the United States of America. By some, he's been called controversial. How can I convince you when you refuse to hear? You try to get it right away from me each time that I come here. You're right to do to me. Everybody say that the way you feel. Now, keep in mind that some of my guests have been approached by Homeland Security or FBI saying, why are you going on the Clay Douglas show? My message to those guys if they're listening this morning is go get a cup of coffee, maybe you'll learn something. We both took the science involved. To defend the Constitution against all of these foreign and domestic. I don't recall there being an expiration date on that. He is the free American, Clay Douglas. Catch the Free American weekdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern. Every time I think about it, now it's just been done. The angry Western baby till I'm almost overcome. I want to dare the moon down from the sky and up and back. For the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamerican.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8621.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American. I'm your host. I am Clay Douglas. And got a few people in the chat room. Maybe some people are waking up. That's nice to see. Getting up a little bit of early. And, okay. Demola, I'm not interested in any of you of these links that you're posting. Quit it. Don't do it anymore, or I'll kick you. This is my show. This ain't your commercial here. Quit it. Got it? All right. Now to get that out of the way. You know, I've been playing a George Bush quote. I've been playing a George Bush quote for a long time, and now there's another quote that I want you to hear, and I'll be talking about this on this show.
And for the international order that we have worked for generations to build. Ordinary men and women are too small-minded to govern their own affairs.
Ordinary men and women.
Progress can only come when individuals surrender their rights to an all-powerful sovereign.
Now, pretty chilling until you surrender your rights. Now, the questions are, of course there's going to be questions about this. They always have a certain amount of deniability here, and of course they've got that. This is Glenn Beck's The Blaze that is countering this, and frankly I'm not very sure of Glenn Beck. He may be an Alex Jones. He may be one of those controlled opposition things. But he says this is not real. Of course, now we got the recording of him saying this. Is it taken out of context? Quite possibly it is. It has been, according to Glenn Beck, it's been deceptively edited, splicing together two comments Obama made during a speech in Brussels on March 26th of this year. Besides deceptive edit, the video also lacks context. In fact, the president was actually railing against those who treat ordinary men and women as too small-minded to govern their own affairs. Oh, I see. Obama was defending us. Now, supposedly the Washington Post, another Jewish-run newspaper, has the full remarks because they don't want you to know that Obama and Bush have been completing the whole New World Order plan for many years. Now, they say, here's the context. Leaders and dignitaries of the European Union, representatives of our NATO alliance, distinguished guests, we meet here in a moment of testing for Europe and the United States and for the international order that we have worked for generations to build. Throughout human history, societies have grappled with fundamental questions on how to organize themselves, the proper context between the individual and the state, and the best means to resolve conflicts between the states. Still, taken in context, he is admitting to the whole New World Order, one world government of the bankers, by the bankers, and for the bankers plan. And then he talks about Europe. And the European Union is a good example of communism. Okay, thanks. If you want to be on my show, by the way to do it ain't to get to me to the chat room, is to use my goddamn phone number to call me. You know, now, what I was going to talk about today, because this whole thing about the people being too small-minded, I almost agree with him. I almost agree with the whole elitist class that somehow believe, and part of it's due to the fact that they've drugged us, they have controlled our thoughts, they have programmed us with their television, their mind control, and more. And they've sprayed you with aluminum, they sprayed you with fluoride, you've been drinking their aluminized, their fluoride contaminated water for years. And so maybe you have been dumbed down. I remember back as far as elementary school, I felt like I had been dropped off of this planet onto this planet. I'd been dropped on my mother's doorstep in a friggin' basket. I really almost believe that, because the schools I went to, I helped the teacher in the first grade teach the other kids how to read. And all through junior high school, I was top of my class, straight A student. Up until I got the motorcycle in the 9th grade. And I thought there was something wrong with people. There were maybe 1 or 2 children in my junior high that scored higher and had a little bit better results on tests than I did. I don't remember dates well. So they had a better recall, better memory, and scored high up on the IQ charts, but they had no common sense. Now, what I've experienced in this whole patriot movement has been discouraging, and at some points here, especially after they tried to kill me, after somebody somewhere with a lot of resources, high degree of control, high degree of intelligence, came after me, tried to destroy me, tried to kill me, tried to kill friends, and did kill friends of mine that I was working with. I started, and the fact is that I did not get any support from the patriots, from the subscribers, from the listeners that I had, or when I was on Worldwide Shortwave, when I was working with Bill Cooper, WWCR, Worldwide Shortwave. I didn't get any support. I didn't get any help. Certainly didn't get it from the Jews like Alex Jones out there. The ones that don't want you to read the protocols of the elders of Zion. And maybe it's because I have the protocols of the elders of Zion up on my website. Maybe that's why I'm blocked in every library out there. Maybe that's why I'm blocked in all of the Intels and the major corporations. My friend Candy can't even go to a library to listen to my show. Won't let her on freeamerican.com. So somewhere there's a force. And, you know, I talk about Israel, I talk about the Jews, because it was 2 Israeli companies, Amdocs, Converse, that tapped my phones, and somebody, ADL, Mossad, CIA, they claim to be CIA, but I'm not buying that. Well, excuse me if I'm distracted. There's a beautiful cardinal sitting on my one dead tree here. Pretty incredible. At any rate, the July issue of the Free American is about to come out. I've been working on it for past month. And finish up with Barack Obama here, this rumor check. Yeah, he's got a lot of other words here. And these ideals have also been tested here in Europe and around the world. These ideals have often been threatened by an older, more traditional view of power. This alternative vision argues that ordinary men and women are too small-minded to govern their own affairs, and that order and progress can only come when individuals surrender their rights to an all-powerful sovereign. Yeah, that's a new world order you've been working for generations. So yeah, it was taken out of context a little bit. And then of course he said often this alternative vision roots itself in the notion that by virtue of race or faith or ethnicity, some are inherently superior to others, and that individual identity must be defined by us versus them, not a national greatness, or that a national greatness must flow not by what the people stand for, but what they are against. Well, it sounds to me like he's talking about Judaism, Zionism, and they may believe that because they believe you goyim are cattle. Us goyim are cattle. That's the way they refer to us. And when you get one goyim that's not afraid of them, that's not afraid of the peer pressure, that's not afraid of and you know, willing to lose their job, lose their incomes or anything else, and what we realize is a war scares the hell out of them. So, yes, Obama did, that was edited. And what Beck says, Glenn Beck said, the president was saying, such ideas are counter to free will, the right to live as we choose, and that power is derived from the consent of the governors. Yeah, okay. So there's the New York Times, the Glenn Beck's, but I say to you, the president did say that, and it may have been taken out of context, but I believe he is working for that New World Order that does believe that. Okay. Hello, James. James Fetzer. How are you?
Just fine, Clayton. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate your input because I did check that Obama quote out. And you were correct. They did, according to the New York Times and Glenn Beck, he did have some other words in there, but he did, according to the New York Times, he did say that leaders and dignitaries of the European Union, the representative of our NATO alliance, distinguished guests, we meet here at a moment of testing for Europe and the United States and for the international order that we have worked for generations to build. Now, right there, he's telling you exactly what George Bush said, and now we can see a new world coming into view. Henceforth, we work for the United Nations. You know, it's he's still admitting right here in his speech in Europe that there is an international order, and he used the term we have worked for generations to build.
Yeah, but he's talking about, like, the United Nations, you know. Clayton, when I grew up, I was born in 1940, right? When I went to junior high and high school, the United States was the greatest hope for world peace. And there's a lot of idealism associated with the United Nations. I think it would be difficult to interpret what he's saying there as an endorsement of what we refer to as the New World Order. I don't think that's what he's saying, but I understand because there's a certain vagueness about the phrase that could be interpreted that way.
Okay. Well, we've got enough problems of our own without, and you know, this is one of the things, in a way, I almost agreed with this, what he also says here. He says, this alternative vision argues that ordinary men and women are too small-minded to govern their affairs, that order and progress can only come when individuals surrender their rights to an all-powerful sovereign. You know, I've been saying for years that the elitists, they don't believe that us goyim got the intelligence or the ability to rule them. That's why they need the rich people, the one-world government of the bankers, by the bankers, and for the bankers, to tell us what's good for us.
Well, I'm not saying you're wrong about what might be his true position, but he certainly using that phrase as a form of describing a view that he rejects in the speech. I just have no doubt about it. I mean, he couldn't possibly actually say those things in an ordinary public forum. He's denouncing it, Clayton. I guarantee you. You look at it, he's denouncing it, even if he secretly believes it.
You're correct about that. He said, he does go on to say, often this alternative vision roots itself in the notion that by virtue of race or faith or ethnicity, some are inherently superior to others, and that national identity must be defined by us versus them, or that national greatness must flow not by what people stand for, but what they are against. And even though this is he may be trying to put that down or come from a different viewpoint, we've got in the whole Zionist conspiracy. Isn't that what the Zionists believe, that us goyim, or us white folks here, us Christians, are simply cattle, and they've got this they're superior to us?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct about the Zionist outlook, and that it's deplorable, and that you can find all kinds of confirmation from it. Let's see, one of the very first early leaders of Israel, Menachem Begin, has an absolutely dreadful quote. You go and look at what Menachem Begin says about other people. I mean, he compares them to insects in relation to the superior people, the chosen people. So I think that you're right. You can find lots to substantiate that, and it's my impression, in fact, that there's a belief there that they're entitled to lie to the rest of the world. Ironically, this is something that was also taught by a fellow named Leo Strauss, who is a professor at the University of Chicago, who many of the neocons studied with, who believes that the elite is privileged, as entitled to lie to the masses. I'm reminded of when Ted Olson, who was then our Solicitor General in the Bush-Cheney administration, was asked whether he could imagine any circumstance under which the government was entitled to lie to the people. And he said he thought there were infinitely many circumstances under which the government was entitled to lie to the people, which means there's no end. If you started to count it out, he could never stop counting the number of reasons why the government could lie to the people. So that this is not necessarily an exclusively Jewish or Zionist view, but it does appear to be a very strong opinion among the elite.
Well, I have told people I don't care who your grandmother slept with. That what religion, what region, what you were born in, I don't see any. I don't see that we got any control over that. So but if you've got free choice, you got free will here. You can choose to be good or evil. You can choose whether you want to try to rule people and try to own people, or try to control people, or just let them be. And that's kind of the direction I was going with this whole thing.
I think the problem is that people who don't have a developed sense of social responsibility or moral consciousness, when they act freely, they don't act in accordance with principles of morality, which would have us treat other persons with respect and never merely as means. All the classic crimes like kidnapping, murder, robbery, rape, all involved in using other people merely as means, which is the core of what it is to act in an immoral fashion. But if you have people who are, don't have a sense of morality, don't have a conscience, then when they act freely, they're going to perform acts that are amoral or immoral because they lack that constraint.
Yes. And that could be the story of our whole history. What we did to the Indians in the Americas when we came over here was pretty deplorable, I think.
It was one of the great acts of genocide in world history, but, it hardly receives any attention at all. I mean, we slaughtered maybe 16 to 20 million Native Americans who were simply living in harmony with Earth. They had a much more refined sense of responsibility to the environment than any American has ever displayed since. So then, you know, the Indians had lots of virtues and were a very honorable people. It was those who came in to steal their land from them who were not.
The matter of fact, the South American Indians, I believe that they were actually more advanced than the Europeans of the day.
That may well be true. And of course, you know, we do know a number of those groups like the Incas performed, you know, sacrifices for their god, but of course that's not unknown in earlier civilizations either. So I suppose, you know, we have to do a comparative study, which most Americans never get around to, Clayton. I mean, you know, you're showing an admirable perspective by looking at diverse cultures and civilizations to gain perspective.
Well, it's been pretty well documented that we've had people mining gold on this planet for 100,000 years and built cities in Africa that were certainly well beyond the whole caveman Darwinism that we've been fed in our educational system.
Well, I don't know about that, Clayton. I mean, I've done a lot of work on evolution. I published 2 books about it. One is entitled The Evolution of Intelligence, which is really the relationship between biology and behavior, where I study how, you know, our genes under normal conditions of gestation yield live births that have a great deal of behavioral plasticity. But you know, research on identical twins has shown about 60% of our behavior or attitudes is genetic, and the other 40% is shaped by our environment. But where human beings in particular show the greatest, you know, plasticity with regard to their mental abilities, the languages they speak, the way they organize their societies, and all that. So I actually believe that we can't make sense of the modern world if we don't embrace evolution.
Okay. What do you see? Now, one of the things that I wanted to discuss with you, in this issue of the Free American, my July issue, be out in a few days, I go in a number of different directions here, and one of the things that I'm working on is from Veterans Today. You work with Gordon Duff. And
Gordon Duff is the senior editor of Veterans Today. Yes, it was he who invited me to become a journalist and to write columns for Veterans Today, and now I have, I don't know, maybe approaching 100 articles on Veterans Today.
One of the better publications out there, and I've just been putting up the atomic attack on the United States, and that's been pretty much overlooked and avoided by mainstream media, and our patriots again, our so-called patriots, our so-called truthers out there. It's like they're yelling about the truth, but they don't really want to know. They don't really want to know the truth.
Well, it's complicated, Clayton, because there are, you know, as in the case of JFK, there's a tremendous disinformation operation going on there. I mean, I observed once to Gordon Duff that I thought 50% of those in the JFK research community were working the other side, and Gordon said, no, Jim, it's 90. Well, if you have 90% who are working the other side, it's hardly surprising that when the truth is discovered, there's going to be a massive assault against it. We have put together, I think, 95% of what happened to JFK, and where a recent summary is available online in a video I produced entitled JFK at 50, the who, the how, and the why. which I have refined in an even subsequent presentation I gave at the Santa Barbara conference on the 50th observance on 22 November 2013, which is being put up now. It'll be out within the next couple of weeks, but a good place to start might be with that one, JFK at 50, the who, the how, and the why.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. I'm certainly interested in that. I was there in Fort Worth. I was in Dallas that night, and my friend, a friend of mine by the name of Galen Dougherty, that we only call Box, he was sitting on the railroad bridge, 17 years old, sitting on the railroad bridge, and saw two riflemen shoot JFK. I gave him hell about it. I said, you know who I am, you know what I do, how come you waited so long to tell me about this? He said, I wanted to live. So,
I think that's the right answer, Clayton. In fact, my research suggests there were shooters at 6 different locations. That the first shot was fired by a deputy sheriff by the name of Harry Livingston from the top of the Dallas County Records building that hit JFK in the back, about 5.5 inches below the collar, just to the right of the spinal column. It was a shallow shot that didn't go anywhere, only about as far as the second knuckle on your little finger. We have the hole in the shirt and the jacket. We have an autopsy diagram. We have reenactment photographs. We have, you know, the president's personal physician's death certificate. We have the mortician's report, all of which locate a wound to the back there, which is terribly important because Gerald Ford would eventually change the description of that wound from his uppermost back, which was already an exaggeration, to the base of the back of the neck to make the magic bullet theory more plausible. But as I have explained many places, including in a lecture I gave at Cambridge, which was published in an international peer-reviewed journal that you can access online, just do a search on reasoning about assassinations. The magic bullet theory isn't even anatomically possible because cervical vertebrae intervene, which means the government and the media have been massively lying to us again and again and again, you know, which is part and parcel of what William Colby told us, namely that the CIA owns everyone of significance in the major media.
All right, we lost a couple of channels there. Let me bring them back up. That happens especially when I have guests like you on. This now, you know, Arlen Specter really disliked me a lot because I went through the 1996 presidential elections with the Republicans. My candidate was Charles Collins, who nobody ever heard of because every time Charles got up to speak at any of the Republican conventions, every cameraman on stage turned his cameras off. And Charles gave me one of Kennedy's $5 bills, the United States notes. I still carry that in my wallet. And Arlen Specter, every time he'd get up to speak, I'd walk down the aisle and say, Arlen, hey Arlen, tell us about that magic bullet, will you?
Yeah, Arlen was a bad guy, I'm sorry to say. I did one article about him explaining how he made 7 false statements, which he had to know to be false, and therefore 7 lies in the course of 7 minutes during a brief interview he did. And of course, you know, it's part and parcel of the huge cover-up that was imposed attempting to frame an innocent man. Would you believe, Clayton, we've discovered, you know, more than 15 indications of Secret Service complicity in setting him up for the hit. The most important of which, well, the 2 most important of which are that the limousines were all in the wrong order. JFK was put right out in front when he should have been in the middle. They canceled the flatbed truck that should have gone before him for newsmen to ride to cover the event with their cameras. And the mayor, the vice president, should have gone before him so the crowd would cheer for them, and then their enthusiasm grow as JFK and Jackie came by. If you put JFK and Jackie out first, then they're not even going to bother to hang around to see the mayor or the vice president. Why should they? They came to see the glamorous couple, the most glamorous couple in the world. And the second is that by putting him out in front, They brought the limousine to a halt in Dealey Plaza after shots began to be fired, including that shot that hit JFK in the back I've already described, including a second shot that hit him in the throat, which was fired from the south end of the Triple Underpass. It appears by an Air Force expert by the name of Jack Lawrence, where the bullet passed right through the windshield en route to its target. But he was still alive, so they stopped the limousine to make sure JFK would be killed, and during that stop he was hit twice in the head, once in the back of the head by a shot fired from the Dow Tex by an anti-Castro Cuban, it appears, by the name of Nestor Tony Escadro, and Jack slumped forward. Jackie eased him back up and was looking him right in the face when he was hit in the right temple by a frangible exploding bullet that set up shock waves that blew his brains out the back of his head to the left rear with such force that when they impacted motorcycle patrolman Bobby Hargis riding there, he thought he himself had been shot. That appears to have been fired by Frank Sturgis, who was a CIA mafia guy from the north end of the Triple Underpass, who even confirmed that he'd fired that shot to a New York Gold Shield detective by the name of Jim Rothstein, whom I happen to know when he arrested him in 1977 in New York City when he came there to attempt to murder Marita Lorenz so she couldn't testify to the House Select Committee on Assassinations. He said, Rothstein said something to him about good shooting, which led Sturgis to say actually he was aiming for his eye, but he moved slightly, so he hit him in the right temple instead, but that he had shot him for abandoning the brigade at the Bay of Pigs and for cavorting with beautiful women who turned out to be spies for other countries. So we got some rather striking confirmation on the occasion of his arrest. He fortunately did not murder Marita Lorenz, who gave the HSCA like 3 boxes of documents and records on the assassination, especially tying in members of Operation 40, which was an assassination team that had been organized under Eisenhower by Richard Nixon. But the HSC discounted all of that. They just shunted it aside and went forward with the theory that the mob had murdered JFK. That was a very convenient scapegoat. But the actual plotters, those behind the scenes who wanted JFK dead, included the CIA, the Joint Chiefs, the anti-Castro Cubans, the Eastern establishment related to the Fed, the Texas oil men, and Israel, because JFK was opposing David Ben-Gurion's desire for Israel to develop nuclear weapons, which Jack thought was a very, very bad idea. I remember as a young Marine Corps officer holding one of those U.S. notes in my hand. It had a red embossed imprint, said United States note instead of green and Federal Reserve note, because Jack thought it was absurd for the government of the United States to be paying interest to a consortium of private banks for publishing the currency of the United States. So he directed the Department of the Treasury to print hundreds of millions of United States notes instead. And of course, this was, one of the many policies, including pulling out of Vietnam, including cracking down on organized crime, including cutting the oil depletion allowance, including shattering the CIA into 1,000 pieces, that LBJ would reverse immediately upon assuming office.
Yeah, I really treasure that red seal and that $5 bill that I've been carrying for 20 years.
Yeah, I think that's a very appropriate memento to have, because the Fed has done so much damage to this country. I mean, the whole Federal Reserve Act was passed, on midnight on Christmas Eve in 1913. Woodrow Wilson believed it was the greatest mistake he had made, just as Harry Truman would regard creating the CIA as the greatest mistake he had made. But, the fact that presidents regret some of these decisions, unfortunately, doesn't minimize the effects those decisions have had.
Well, I've told people that, they're really, that they've refined the art of slavery to the point the slaves don't know they're slaves. You know, average man. I'm not a slave, man. I can go get in my pickup and go get a beer. Watch. Called economic slavery. Do we have any, and you know, I've been looking at a lot of different things, and the technology is approaching to the point right now that at about pretty much about the same time that the Federal Reserve took over, and our founding father Thomas Jefferson warned us, if you ever allow a private bank to issue your money, the banks and the corporations that spring up around them will leave your children homeless in the land that we conquered. And that's so I see that that's what's happened now. I have a little difficulty since every plank on the Communist Manifesto is intact in America today. It's hard to decide whether we're a communist country or a fascist country ruled by the corporations. Maybe you could clarify that for me.
Oh, I think there's no doubt. You know, communism has never been a threat to the United States, even though J. Edgar Hoover got a lot of public relations mileage out of, you know, worrying about the communist threat. In fact, they'd have communist cell meetings where every member present was an informant for the FBI. I mean, capitalism is such a strong part of our organization of our society. It's just not going to go away. The problem, the threat to the United States has always become that the capitalists would become too strong, that corporations would become too powerful. And that's what we have today. We have a government that's essentially run by the rich and powerful and corporations. In fact, social scientists have done studies now revealing that the United States is no longer a democracy but an oligarchy in which its government is not of, by, and for the people, but of, by, and for the rich, which is a very different thing. So that I think, Clayton, is what we are up against, and where it turns out that the government has actually been operating under a set of emergency procedures that were implemented by FDR back around 1933, and that we've never really been restored to a constitutional form of government. And it's obvious today with all the lawlessness, the NSA surveillance, the incredibly unconstitutional decisions. I mean, they're just blatant on their face, even made by our own Supreme Court, which I believe arises because the NSA surveillance has obtained so much information it can blackmail anyone, from the members of the court to the president to the members of his administration to the Congress, the senators, the representatives. I mean, J. Edgar Hoover had sex dossiers on all the members of Congress that he used to influence them. The mob, however, had one on Hoover, including compromising photographs of him with his close personal friend Clyde Tolson, so that they were able to control Hoover into not even acknowledging the existence of organized crime until the Joe Valachi hearings took place, where he described the structure of the mafia in such detail it was no longer politically possible for Hoover to continue to deny it. But blackmail, unfortunately, has been a part of our life, and the NSA surveillance has nothing to do with domestic terrorism. I mean, Americans don't know because the media is controlled and won't report it. But a subcommittee of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs released a report on 3 October 2012 based upon its review of 680 fusion center studies, where fusion centers merge federal, state, and local anti-terrorist activity, gathered between 2009 and 2010, Clayton, and in that 680 reports, they found not a single instance, not one instance of domestic terrorist activity. Now, that's such a large sample all over the United States, it's a very reasonable statistical inference to infer that domestic terrorism is virtually non-existent in the United States, which is why the government is resorting to fabricated events such as Sandy Hook and the Boston bombing, and then a host of more trivial events in Santa Barbara and Seattle and elsewhere to try to keep us fearful, apprehensive, and therefore have a greater sense of dependency on the government. It's outrageous.
You know, I have referred to in my film True Face of FEMA, I filmed the first Homeland Security meeting up at Sandia Labs in Albuquerque on Kirtland Air Force Base. Colonel John Brinkerhoff was lecturing law enforcement and telling them we're in for a long war. This war may go on longer than the Cold War. And the enemy doesn't have tanks, doesn't have planes, doesn't have helicopters. They're going to use unconventional methods. We got to use unconventional methods to oppose them. And in case of an atomic attack or single outbreak of smallpox in a major metropolitan area, we'll need 400,000 well-armed, well-trained, organized, disciplined troops to control the American people, because some of them just won't follow orders. And this, when I put that film out, that may have been one of the reasons they tried to kill me back in 2004.
I wouldn't be surprised, Clayton, because they're trying to use Sandy Hook. Well, the latest report we have from a school safety expert in Los Angeles by the name of Paul Preston, who followed the events as they were taking place that day and was convinced that it was a drill, not a real event, because he had supervised drills before. There was a lack of intensity. There should have been hundreds of students pouring out of the school to be evacuated. There had been a whole lot of buses there to get them away. None of that was taking place. There wasn't even a surge of EMTs into the building to get those little bodies off the hospitals where doctors could pronounce them dead or alive. It was obvious to him that this was a drill, and because of his extensive background in education in Los Angeles, he has contacts with members of the Obama administration in the Department of Education. And would you believe that every one of them confirmed it had been a false flag? Every one of them confirmed it had been a drill, that no children had died, and that was part of an anti-gun agenda. I published an article about it, which every one of your listeners should read, Clayton. It's entitled Sandy Hook Redux, R-E-D-U-X. Obama officials confirm that it was a drill and no children died. It's been a huge success. It's had over 185,000 hits and over 2,300 shares. Your readers should definitely check it out, because it's overwhelming evidence there that this was a fabricated event, a staged event, and that we were taken to the cleaners, where Eric Holder appears to have played a key role in all of this. The governor of the state, whose name is Malloy, held a press conference the day of the shooting with his lieutenant governor and said that they had been spoken to that something like this might happen. So I asked myself, spoken to? Something like this? What could that mean? There are only two alternatives. He had been told that there was going to be a shooting in a school in Connecticut, in which case he as governor ought to have taken steps to elevate the security of the schools by warning the school districts, but he did not do that. Or alternatively, he'd been told that they were going to take an abandoned school, and Sandy Hook appears to have been abandoned in 2008 and then resurrected in 2012 to serve as a prop and perform a drill that would be presented as though it were a real event, which is exactly what happened. We know that Eric Holder visited the governor less than a month before this event happened. Eric Holder has as his pet project Operation Longevity, which is a massive anti-gun agenda, and where Barack Obama is deeply complicit in all of this. They're trying to take away our guns because Homeland Security doesn't want to lose a lot of its people if there remain 100 million armed Americans. They're targeting veterans, 9/11 truthers, Ron Paul supporters, constitutionalists, militia members, NRA members, anyone who might have the knowledge, the ability, and the wherewithal to resist the imposition of a military police state. They've been militarizing the local police departments all over the country. That's part and parcel of what these fusion centers are all about. They're giving them now surplus military equipment, including armored personnel carriers, which the police in the United States have never needed before. And I reiterate, there is no domestic terrorist threat. I published about it, too, in an article entitled Diffusion and Fear in America, the Non-Existent Domestic Terrorist Threat. Everyone ought to read that one, too.
I have told people in that film, True Face of Fame, I said, you've got about as much chance of getting killed by a terrorist in America as you do getting eaten by a great white in Phoenix.
Yeah, that's right. The probability of dying from being hit by lightning or from being stung to death by a swarm of bees is greater than dying from a terrorist attack. This is all phony. This is all exaggerated. This is all lies. And they're just performing one after another of these phony events, like out in Santa Barbara we had, what should we call him, the Virgin Killer? Here's a guy whose father is a movie producer of the Hunger Games, who's worth, millions of dollars. The guy drives a Mercedes, a BMW. He's about 21 years old, and he looks perfectly normal, but he allegedly stabbed 3 women and shot 3 others because he couldn't get laid. Give me a break, Clayton. This is completely ridiculous. We're supposed to believe this kind of rubbish?
Now, let me shift a little bit of focus here. What about what's happening in the border? Right now, they have started running children into this country to the tune of 50,000. They're using military bases to house them. And another writer that I respect a lot, I'm using one of his articles right now. He said the UN is positioning to lock down the United States. And we're seeing pictures of UN vehicles on trucks, on trains, moving all around this country. What about what's going on?
Well, the whole thing at the border is bizarre. Apparently, these children are being brought to the border on Mexican trains. Yes. I mean, the idea of sending all these children into the United States is bizarre in the extreme. It's clearly an attempt to overwhelm, the border patrols, which can't possibly keep up with all of this. If there are photographs of UN equipment all over the country, I would find that very disturbing. Because, there are lots of things that can happen here. We could be subjected to another 9/11. Dick Cheney, of all people, who appears to have been the executive director on 9/11 from an underground bunker beneath the White House. He appears to have been the guy who controlled what was going on in executing this phony attack, which was created by the CIA, the neocons, and the Department of Defense, and the Mossad to get the United States involved in wars in the Middle East so it could deconstruct the modern Arab states that served as a counterbalance to Israeli domination of the Middle East, and to pass the Patriot Act, which subverted the Constitution and created this monster entity called the Department of Homeland Security, which is modeled after the East German Stasi, widely recognized as the most efficient secret police organization the world has ever seen. They brought that here to the United States, and that was done by George Bush and Dick Cheney. And now, so they fabricate this event of 9/11. They create chaos in the Middle East. Millions of people have died. It cost trillions and trillions of dollars from the American Treasury. The taxpayer is paying for it. And at the same time, they get the Patriot Act passed to deprive us of our constitutional rights. I say, Clayton, we must not give up our guns. I have said on more than one occasion, when they come for our guns, the time has come to use them.
Well, it's getting to the point that actually the average American here, and they are brain dead, they are programmed by their television sets. They don't know what to believe. I mean, 20 years ago, I thought I watched the NBC. I watched the Today Show every day. Thought I was informed. But this thing that's happening on the border, they're talking about a humanitarian crisis, and I'm kind of reminded of Henry Kissinger. And at the same time, they're bringing these children up the gang members and the drug cartels, which may as well be the CIA and the Mossad. They brought all the cocaine into Mena, Arkansas. I knew Barry Seal, who flew it in. You know, and I in my book Mystery Babylon, I detailed the whole Colonel Catolo's Operation Watchtower, which ran consistently in conjunction with Iran-Contra. Same players. George Bush was CIA director, and they brought all the cocaine in from Colombia through Panama. They're still doing this. I mean, they're bringing all the drugs in here, where our troops are controlling the drugs in Afghanistan. Those nasty old Taliban were destroying those opium poppy crops, so we had to take them out. We'd promised them a carpet of gold, but they went after our heroin, and so we gave them a carpet of bombs.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And they offered to turn over Osama bin Laden if we could produce evidence that he'd been involved. We never did that, and of course, because we couldn't. In fact, Osama bin Laden had nothing to do with it. When he was first informed about 9/11, he denied having been involved. He said that it was contrary to the tenets of the Quran to murder innocent women and children. He said that there appeared to be a government within the government that wanted to blame this on Muslims. And we have no less an authority than William Jefferson Clinton, who's made a similar observation. Bill Clinton said there's a government within the government and I don't control it. We can refer to it as the secret shadow government, but it appears to involve elements of the CIA and the big bankers and no doubt the Council on Foreign Relations, who are actually calling the shots about what happens here with regard to these developments. Osama bin Laden, by the way, died in Afghanistan on 15 December 2001. He was buried in an unmarked grave in accordance with Muslim tradition. There were local obituaries. Nick Kollerstrom, who's an expert on the 7/7 London bombing attacks, has published an article about it entitled Osama bin Laden, 1957 to 2001. David Ray Griffin has published a book about it entitled Osama bin Laden, Dead or Alive, and I published an article about it when the film came out about the raid on the compound, which was a completely fabricated event entitled Zero Dark 30, The Deeper, Darker Truths. Once again, I would encourage your listeners to read that article, Zero Dark 30, The Deeper, Darker Truths, to see how far our government goes to lie and deceive us about matters of the greatest importance.
No surprise for me there. I'll see if we can't get Sandy Hook's Redux and Zero Dark 30 in this issue that I'm putting together right now.
Well, I want to thank you, Clayton, for having me on. As I mentioned, I have to do my own radio show here in just a few minutes, but it's a real pleasure being on with you. And I encourage everyone, if they want to know the politics about 9/11, there's a wonderful article I co-authored with Preston James entitled Peeling the 9/11 Onion, Layers of Plots Within Plots. And if they want to know how it was done, how the Twin Towers were done, which appears to have been with a sophisticated arrangement of mini or micro nukes, they should go to the Complete Midwest 9/11 Truth Conference and watch Part 2, the Complete Midwest 9/11 Truth Conference, and watch Part 2. Clayton, you're doing a great job by keeping these issues before the public, which I greatly appreciate.
Well, I sure appreciate you being on with me any way I can help. It's all about working together, James, and on one hand, I'm pretty encouraged because we really have technology that is beneficial. I mean, we can get by without gasoline. We can run our ships on the water they float on. We have the ability to do that if we can get away from the stranglehold of the media and their owners, the owners of the media, the oil companies, the people that want to, put some use to that crap that flows out of the ground. We've got the whole Tesla universe out here at our fingertips, but we're not allowed to touch it, in my opinion.
Clayton, you're doing a great job of getting the word out. I want to tell you how much I appreciate that, and I'm very grateful to have the chance to come on your show from time to time.
I appreciate it too. Thank you for doing it on such short notice. I'll try to give you more of a heads up next time.
No problemo, Clayton. Thanks.
All right,
again.
Thank you, James. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
James Fetzer, folks. And, yeah, this is just some of what we've got in the next issue of the Free Americans. But, you know, what kind of feedback do I get here? Oh, well, your haircut makes you look like a doofus. Yeah, okay. So much for Facebook for any intelligent conversation. And, you know, folks, I do not do this. I try to bring you this information so you can make intelligent decisions. They are lining up, and we've got the proof. I've got the videos up. I've got the photographs. I got the statements. People that saw these UN vehicles on trains. We'll be right back. Stay with me.
Discover what's really going on in the news that mainstream media won't tell you. Are you frustrated with your elected politicians? Get the news behind the news at truthradio.com. At Truth Radio, you can listen live or listen to a large selection of archived programs on demand. Listen when you want to. truthradio.com. The truth is out there. All you have to do.
Perhaps the most influential leader in the jury power movement is Larry Dodge. Years ago, Larry Dodge attended and spoke at a seminar, and video of that seminar has been in the library of Truth Radio for many years. I now have a DVD of Larry Dodge's speech about jury power. If you're interested in the jury issue and how juries should be empowered to judge both the facts and the law, I'd be happy to send you this DVD. When you write for it, ask for the Larry Dodge DVD about jury power. Dodge on jury. And I think you will really benefit by listening to this. Our address is P.O. Box 344, Napomo, California, zip code 93444. That's P.O. Box 344, zip code 93444.
Alright, what the hell is that? Hey, I don't know what that is. We're trying. That sounded like it was coming from Truth Radio. It was coming from Truth Radio. Let's fix it. Hopefully they got that fixed. We'll bring back. Yeah, it's busy now. Let's try it again. Alright, we're back on Truth Radio. Whatever that feedback was, I don't know. I don't know. And, you know, I've got links up, and I've got some films up, documentaries up, on the Free American that you should see. And it's talking about exactly what I'm talking about. A few weeks ago, I put something up, a link up, that showed that the U.S. Navy was considering and implementing running their ships on hydrogen, so they didn't have to transport gasoline, they didn't have to buy gasoline, all they had to do is let the water inside there and run their engines off of it. I've got a video up, I've got a documentary up on running our vehicles on water. And I've also got a quote up there by David Koch. He wants to run for president. He's running on hemp, and he's talking about hemp and hydrogen. Hemp and hydrogen. It is a way to do it. We got it now. And I'm coming out with the next issue of the Free American in just a few days. Before July 4th, I will have the new issue of the magazine out. You'll be able to recognize it by the UN tank on the cover. This is what they're setting us up for. They're trying to create a civil war. They're trying to create, they want you to be afraid of the police. They want the police to be afraid of you. We can nip this in the bud by working together with our law enforcement, by bringing the sheriff on our side, and that's happening. It's happening in Texas, it's happening in the counties, it's happening down on Laredo. And what's happening in Laredo, we just talked to you about that not too long ago. And this has again, we're putting this in this issue of the Free American, but this is just out. Obama is now to seek $2 billion to deal with the illegal surge on the border. He'll seek more than $2 billion to respond to the flood of immigrants illegally entering the U.S. through the Rio Grande Valley area of Texas, and ask for new powers to deal with the returning immigrant children apprehended while traveling without their parents, a White House official said Saturday. So they don't want to close the border, they want to catch 50,000 children to create a humanitarian crisis, with Obama looking to Congress for help with what he called an urgent humanitarian situation. Nancy Pelosi visited a Border Patrol facility in Brownsville that held unaccompanied children. More than 52,000 unattended children, mostly from Central America, have been apprehended entering the U.S. illegally since October. The fact are, these are children and families. We have a moral responsibility to address this in a dignified way. Yes. Obama plans to make request of Congress in a letter to be sent Monday, the White House official said. Details of the emergency appropriation. Just need $2 billion. It's an emergency. It's including the exact amount how it will be sent will come from after lawmakers return from their holiday resource on July 7th. We could do that. If they were funding the militias, if the Department of Health and Human Services was putting a little bit more regulations on how they pass out their food stamps, how they pass out their relief. Now keep in mind, 20 years ago, I went down to Phoenix and I ran a factory for a friend of mine. And this factory had illegals working there. Our foreman was an illegal. Good guy. Nice guy. Glass blower. He got caught and sent back, and I went to INS to try to get him back. We needed him. I wanted to get him back. I couldn't do it. There was no way I could get him back legally. He had to come back, and we put him back to work right away. And that's right, Jerry. Our whole economy could turn around overnight if we started using hydrogen. And the people in the film that invented the whole, that had the dune buggy that was running on water, they killed him. They killed him. Just like they tried to kill and control Paul Pantone. And now let's talk about hemp again. Let's talk about that. Because we made some strides. 20 states you can smoke a joint now without going to jail if you get permission from a doctor. Screw that. Just if your neighbor grows some good pot, buy a little bit from him. We don't have to involve the government. We don't have to involve licensing. We don't have to do any of that shit. And, for you brain-dead idiots out there, we need to put people in jail if they're smoking pot, if they've got cocaine, if they got heroin. We need to fill up our jails. We need to... This report just out. 6 months of legal marijuana, and Colorado has more cash and less crime. With the passage of Amendment 64 in November 2012, Colorado made history and became one of the first 2 states to approve legal regulation of the cultivation, manufacture, and sale of marijuana for adults 21 and over. Colorado has become a proving ground to demonstrate the positive aspects of regulation instead of prohibition, and hopefully will promote similar efforts elsewhere. It's what I want to do. It's what I wrote books about 45 years ago. It's what I want to help with. Now, keep in mind, folks, I helped start the militia. It's the militias that make the difference at the Bundys. It's the militias that are making the difference on the border. I didn't do anything wrong. I've been demonized for it, and they've tried to kill my source of income. So I have to turn to you and say, look, if I try to advertise, if I try to get advertising, first of all, I won't do that. I won't do that. If I don't know the people or the product that I'm promoting, I won't do it. You can't just buy advertising on the Free American. I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you if you've got something that works. And I'd like to get a little bit more advertising. I'd like to move to Colorado so I can smoke a joint without having to worry about the police raiding me and carrying me off to jail for possession. I did my time for possession of marijuana in Texas when I was threatened with a 99-year sentence 45 years ago. Fortunately, we've come a little ways. Now, despite warnings from legalization opponents, Colorado looks pretty much the same as ever since its regulation, if not better. Crime is down, the economy is sound, and there remains strong overall support for legalization throughout the state. Even the state's Director of Marijuana Coordination was quick to note recently that the sky hasn't fallen since the first retail shops opened on January 1st. Though it's far too early to make any definitive declarations about emerging social trends, there are some promising indications that things are moving in the right direction here in Colorado. According to the Uniform Crime Reporting data from Denver, there has been a 10.1% decrease in overall crime from this time last year. and a 5.2% drop in violent crime. The state has garnered over $10 million in taxes from retail sales in the first 4 months. The first $40 million of this tax revenue is earmarked for public schools and infrastructure, as well as for youth educational campaigns about substance use. There are renewed efforts to study the medical efficacy of marijuana within the state, making Colorado the epicenter for marijuana research. The marijuana industry has developed quickly, generating thousands of new jobs. It's estimated there are currently about 10,000 people directly involved with this industry, with another 1,000 to 2,000 gaining employment in the past few months alone. Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, who opposed Amendment 64, recently compared Colorado's economy since legalization to other states by noting, "While the rest of the country's economy is slowly picking back up, we're thriving here in Colorado." For example, the demand for commercial real estate has increased dramatically, with houses in the state appreciating up to 8.7% in the past year alone. The voters of Colorado retain an overall positive view of the regulated marijuana market, with 54% of Colorado voters still supporting marijuana legalization and regulation. By removing criminal penalties from certain marijuana offenses, thousands of individuals will avoid the collateral consequences associated with a criminal record. The state is estimated to potentially save $12 to $40 million over the span of a year simply by ending arrest for marijuana possession. Despite a long history of government efforts to obstruct marijuana science, we now have decades of proof that the plant is far less harmful than its prohibition. Colorado and Washington have already changed the dialogue during drug prohibition throughout the U.S. and around the world, and I remain cautiously optimistic about our efforts in these states will continue to inform and encourage approaches to drug use grounded in science, compassion, health, and human rights. And that's right. We will be putting that in this issue of the Free American, in the July issue. Part of the, well, what we're talking about. Alright, what's going on? Okay, we talked about the border. Alright, let's see about this. Okay. Let's talk about hydrogen for a while. Let's see where we can get. I think this does some more. I put this right at the top of my site because this is really important, folks. It's really important because we've got the way to break the stranglehold that oil has on us. You know, one of Rockefeller's quotes was, "Competition is a sin." We don't want that. Don't want that. He doesn't want you having any choice whatsoever. So now we've talked about hemp. It runs on water. Let's play a little bit of that.
I think there's a strong possibility that we're at a turning point in history, a complete revolution in human affairs, with the discovery of totally new energy sources. Many people are skeptical of this, but I think we may be going through the 4 stages involved in any revolutionary development. 1, it's nonsense, don't waste my time. 2, oh, it's interesting but not important. 3, I always said it was a good idea. And 4, I thought of it first.
It runs on water. Arthur C. Clarke, futurologist.
Can you imagine what it would be like if you could split water and run it into your engines? You could put water in your fuel tank to fly airplanes, power stations.
Ordinarily, we look at water to drink and to wash our clothes. And today, you have to look at water as a fantastic new fuel source.
A world powered by water might seem like a dream, a pure fantasy. But 100 years ago, that is exactly what the men of steam would have thought about a world powered by oil.
Back in the mid-1980s, I was working on a system, putting in some controls, when a boiler feed line like this began to have a water hammer, a vibrational problem. And I noticed the pipe changed temperature. And I thought, well, what would happen if we could harness this energy in a non-combustible source? That led to the invention of the hydrosonic pump. Turned out to be my first invention. I'd never invented anything before.
Jim Griggs' first invention was to bring him into direct confrontation with the world of science.
Well, the first year or so, it was kind of just a project that was piddled with, kind of like a hobby on the weekends and spare time with friends. And that was the first time that we noticed the excess energy. It was back in the late 1980s. And I knew that you couldn't get more energy out than you put in. It violated the laws of physics. So I just set the pump to the side for a few months and just left it alone, didn't mess with it, trying to figure out where I was making my mistake.
Jim Griggs is bang in the middle of the American tradition that has spawned such men as the Wright brothers and Edison, inquisitive, good with machines, working away in their garages and back sheds to...
Nope. Obviously, I don't want to do that. Hold on just a second here.
Inquisitive, good with machines, working away in their garages and back sheds to turn an idea into a device that works. In Griggs' case, the mistake in the calculations that he was so concerned about has not gone away. In fact, it seems to have turned into a major scientific heresy. The machine appears to produce more energy than it consumes, and Griggs is now convinced that that is no mistake. He has struggled for 4 years to turn his spare time enthusiasm into a serious business. What he has tried to do is to capture the intriguing effect he'd noticed in that vibrating boiler pipe and use it to create a totally new water heater, one that works without any heat source. His company now produces what amounts to a well-engineered water hammer. It thumps and smashes the water fed into it and raises the temperature to boiling point or to steam in a matter of seconds to replace household or industrial boilers. Now, they happen to call these machines pumps.
What we have is a hydrosonic pump that has a rotor located inside. It's a cylinder that has holes bored in it at specific angles and depths, ranging from a few hundred holes up to a few thousand, depending on whether we're going to make hot water or steam.
The key to the machine seems to be the number and the design of the holes in the rotor. Briggs has experimented with many different combinations to get the best results. The rotor fits tightly into a steel chamber with only a very small gap between the two. Water is fed into the gap, and the rotor is spun rapidly by a small electric motor. As it spins, the water is pummeled and hammered through the holes. In seconds it flows out of the cylinder as hot water or steam. What's so extraordinary about such an ordinary-looking machine is the claim that it is more than 100% efficient. More energy has been measured coming out in the form of heat or steam than the electrical energy needed to turn the rotor. The term for this is over-unity. Scientifically, this is supposed to be impossible because it overturns the fundamental law of conservation of energy. It says you cannot get something for nothing. And yet, external observers claim to have measured here up to 70% more energy out than in.
It continues to bother me as something every day you get up and you look to say, well, maybe today I'll find where I made my mistake in my calculations and this will be explained. Or a scientist will come up with a theory that will fit what we're doing and explain it.
Tom Droege has had a distinguished career at one of the leading scientific centers in America, Fermilab. He also has a nationwide reputation as an investigator into the unusual. He's far too experienced to worry about the impact on his career of working on the fringes of science. When news about Jim Griggs' invention began to spread, Droege was contacted hundreds of miles away in his home city of Chicago.
I came to Georgia out of an internet group, just happened to put up a note that says, why don't we send Tom Droege to Georgia to investigate this device? What I said to the group is that I can't go and prove that it's right or wrong. What I can do is go and look and see if the way he approaches the problem makes sense to me, and if he's doing all the right kinds of things.
Tom Droege was on his way to meet Jim Griggs and his business partner Kelly Hudson.
I believe that most of the scientific community is just closed-minded about this, and they'll always be looking, or not always, hopefully not always, but are basically looking for anything to discredit or disprove what we're doing. And you know, you're going up against some pretty smart people that are saying that.
Well, I really don't expect to find anything positive here. None of these devices have panned out in the past, so I really don't expect this one to. Hi, I'm Tom Droege.
Jim Griggs.
Hi, Jim. Good to meet you. What kind of efficiencies are you seeing out of this on like a hot water run?
The normal hot water run efficiencies run anywhere from around 108% efficient up to about 115% efficient.
I was shown that it was putting out, I don't know, 8 or 10% more energy than it was put in. But these are just numbers on a computer, and what you're looking for is something that's convincing. Now, what I did do is try to look at the experimental technique and ask very specific questions about how they made measurements.
Then we have generally 6 J-type thermocouples that feed back to the data acquisition system.
And then you've got a thermometer here just to check that the thermocouples are reading correctly.
The company has invested probably in excess of $50,000 over the last year and a half to buy instrumentation and take the time to perform some of these measurements.
They've invested a fair amount of money and effort, and it was actually good enough to design to take the measurements they needed to take. What was missing was sophistication in the analysis of the measurements that they were taking. True.
Tom's comments to us were that we were not a scientific laboratory, that we did not keep consistent log books, things that would be just acceptable, you know, a nice acceptable laboratory procedure in the scientific community. But our answer to that has been, we're the first ones to tell you we are not scientists. That is not our job.
One either plays the inventor game or you play the science game. If you're playing the inventor game, then you keep everything completely secret and you just sell your excess energy. If you're playing the science game, then there are specific rules that are in effect. And the key part of the science game is replication. There were not even the most fundamental scientific processes applied to the way of making the measurements and the way to analyze them. And so I don't think there's any particular reason to believe them as true.
Most inventions don't start in a university or big city. They start in someone's garage or in someone's brain as an idea. The fact that we started out in a little town in Powder Springs, Georgia, and then grew into a bigger plant in the thriving metropolis of Rome, Georgia, no, it's not surprising to me.
The visit was inconclusive. Tom Droege found no proof of overunity, but nor could he disprove it. Griggs has installed 9 machines so far. In each case, it's caused some surprise. 250 miles away, for example, a Griggs machine has been heating the water for Albany Fire Station for over a year.
Right after our initial installation, we measured the output with Jim's team, representatives from a local university, one of our local power companies, and we were all astounded with the output. Our measurements indicated that the system was more than 100% efficient, which is very hard to believe. The average engineer would say baloney. But our measuring devices were certified, and you know, until someone comes along and proves us different, we will say that it is more than 100% efficient.
The scientific jury is still out on the Griggs machine, and the debate rumbles on across the internet. But the idea of a challenge to physics coming from such a direction is one that is rejected by leading particle physicist Frank Close.
What would be revolutionary would be if you summed up all of the energy released and you found that the sum total was greater than you put in at the start. Then you'd be generating energy for free. And this would overthrow 300 years of experience, which has become embodied in what we call the principle of the conservation of energy. You can change energy from one form to another, but the sum total always balances.
Science guys don't like non-science guys inventing things. It's discredited almost immediately. Whether you talk about the high priest in Egypt or you talk about the monks that had the monasteries in the Black Plague, they were the caretakers of knowledge. And I think the caretakers of knowledge look with disdain on commoners who think they have knowledge.
The fact is that Jim Griggs and his machine are by no means alone. Not only in America, but in both Russia and Japan, for example, there are reports of machines that seem to tap an unexplained source of energy. They don't all involve water, but they do all seem to produce more energy than they use. What's more, this is by no means a modern phenomenon. The debate goes back at least to the turn of the century. Today, Nikola Tesla is almost unknown. 100 years ago, he was regarded as one of the most prolific and inventive engineers the world has ever known. At a time when Edison was persuading great cities like New York and London to install costly and inefficient direct current generating stations, Tesla, backed only by Westinghouse and defying all critics, invented the system for the vastly more efficient alternating current, which now powers the entire modern world. Famous Tesla coil, he was able to produce hitherto undreamed of voltages. Tesla had a vision of what he called a universal energy field, which he believed would eventually be tapped. He wrote, "Throughout space there is energy. It is a mere question of time when men will succeed in attaching their machinery to the very wheelwork of nature." Unfortunately, his extreme love of showmanship, demonstrated in these photographs, didn't help his cause. But he persuaded the power company Westinghouse to build him a power station devoted entirely to his laboratory. Here he built the biggest coil he'd ever constructed, set to work to tap the universal energy field. He experimented with power levels and frequencies that had never been approached before. Several million volts, pulsing at 50,000 cycles per second. This was big science, difficult to reproduce even today. But Tesla was working in uncharted territories. As he wound the voltage and the frequencies up, there was a great and still unexplained surge of excess power created at the very heart of the machine. It was so powerful, it flowed back up the cables, overriding the safety circuits. The entire power station was burned out. And it turned out to be the beginning of the end for Tesla. His reputation never recovered. He spent the last 20 years of his life in relative obscurity. Even today, his experiments remain only vaguely understood and largely ignored. The story leaps on to Moscow in 1980. A physicist named Alexander Chernetsky was working along similar lines to Tesla, although on a laboratory scale. In addition to his measurements, he had a crude system of light bulbs to indicate power output. Under certain conditions, with high voltages and high pulse rates, he stumbled upon a startling effect. He writes of a surge of power at the heart of the apparatus and a sharp increase in power output. Over a period of 4 years, his research indicated that this apparatus could generate 5 times the power it consumed. Few of the scientific establishment in Russia or elsewhere took his claims seriously, but one top physicist from the West, interested in fringe science, did go to see Chernetsky in 1991.
We went to see his device. It was a very sort of dramatic demonstration. I was impressed. I went home at the first night in Moscow and didn't sleep very much trying to figure out how this thing could be working, whether it was a trick, what principles could truly be involved.
Chernetsky's papers talk of tapping the energy of the vacuum, language very reminiscent of Tesla. A report published by the Russian news agency Novosti describes some of the extraordinary potential implications of his research, not least a new and non-polluting power-generating industry. Stimulated by what he'd seen, Puthoff finalized arrangements for Chernetsky to continue his work in the US. The Russian died suddenly in 1992, and no one has taken up his research. The work of Tesla, Chernetsky, Jim Griggs and others has been largely ignored by the scientific establishment, almost certainly because it poses too big a threat to reputations and research grants to dabble with such revolutionary stuff. But that is now changing. The freedom of the internet has begun to break the stranglehold of an establishment dominated by peer review. And as more of these devices have come to light, 1 or 2 mainstream scientists have begun to tackle the issues. One possible explanation for these startling results does lie within the current laws of science. It's a concept known as zero-point energy.
Physicists know that we're immersed in something called zero-point energy. It has the name zero point. We give it that name because even if we were to cool this entire room down to absolute zero in terms of its temperature, that energy would still remain. It might be surprising to think that at absolute zero everything would freeze out and there would be any energy left, but in fact that's the case.
Andrei Sakharov, the Soviet physicist, argued that we should regard all matter as floating in a universal sea of energy. And modern physics tells us that the space between the stars and the space between the particles which make up matter are filled with vast amounts of fluctuating energy, fluctuations which are fundamental to our view of the fabric of nature. So if we think of an atom with its nucleus and its orbiting electrons, modern physics tells us that there is a basic fuzziness about the energy levels of the electrons, rather like an out-of-focus photograph. We cannot tell both the position and the speed at the same time. Moreover, the random fluctuations in energy levels can be intense enough to spring pairs of particles spontaneously from the vacuum, only to disappear again. Energy into matter and back into energy again, as Einstein taught us. This is one of the most extraordinary manifestations of zero-point energy. But just how much of this energy is there? Can it ever be tapped?
It turns out this energy is quite intense. Nobel laureate Feynman, one of Einstein's proteges, Wheeler, love to comment on how intense this energy is. The way Wheeler puts it is there's enough energy in the volume of a coffee cup, in fact more than enough, to evaporate all the world's oceans. The potential of this is vast. You could go all the way from having a replacement never say die battery for your electric toothbrush, all the way up to powering aircraft carriers and spaceships.
If there is such a thing as zero-point energy, and if you can tap it, it's like living next to Grand Coulee Dam. If you know how to drill a hole through the dam and use the water pressure that comes out, it's there for you to use.
Could Tesla, or Janetsky, or even Big Jim Griggs from Georgia have chanced to cross the key that unlocks not only this unfathomable sea of energy, but also some of the mysteries of the universe? Zero-point energy has been called the possible Rosetta Stone of physics.
What the Rosetta Stone allowed you to do is translate from one language to another language that you've never seen before, because one of them you recognized. We have several different laws that attempt to describe the universe. There is no unified theory. There's three separate theories. If indeed the Rosetta Stone existed, then you would allow these theories to merge into one, and you would understand the source and origin of the universe and how it's put together.
Well, it was during the oil embargo of the United States. It alarmed me that a little country over in the Far East could actually cripple the United States. And realizing that the entire industrial base of the United States and the world is based on the supply and the utilization of energy, it became imperative that we must try to bring in an alternate fuel source and do it very quickly. Of course, I thought originally with the right type of funding, we could possibly get it in within 6 months. But reality shows that the 12 to 15 years was more correct in this projection.
Back in the 70s, Stan Meyer set out single-handedly to solve America's energy problems. He decided to do it using water, the world's most abundant storehouse of hydrogen, which is a far more powerful fuel than oil. For 15 years, Meyer has been fighting to get his inventions taken seriously.
Most inventors have to be a loner. You have to be somewhat thick-skinned and don't rely on other people to support you, because they will not. More times than not, an invention is really stolen from the inventors. Even in my prior development of high technology, I've had patents taken from me. I learned from the School of Hard Knocks to be very cautious.
Meyer has always stood out against the crowd. He has no formal qualifications as a scientist because he didn't wait to graduate from high school, leaving early to go straight into research at the high-powered Battelle Institute in his native Ohio. Now he works full-time as a private inventor. He's built a device with potentially revolutionary implications. There is nothing startling about a machine that can extract the hydrogen from water. What is highly unusual is that it should do so with ordinary tap water. The conventional method is called electrolysis. Meyer has turned that process on its head. Unlike electrolysis, his device doesn't use up large amounts of electric current, nor does it produce an enormous amount of waste heat. For 20 years, he has been refining a method to fracture water, which produces vast amounts of hydrogen on demand. This is not his latest apparatus. He was unwilling to let us point a camera at that. This is the simple device he used to convince a reluctant patent office that his revolutionary concept actually works.
Yeah, let's stop there for just a moment and give you the rest of the story. Stanley Meyer died suddenly on March 21st, 1998 after dining at a restaurant. An autopsy report by the Franklin County, Ohio coroner concluded that Meyer had died of a cerebral aneurysm, but conspiracy theorists insist he was poisoned to suppress the technology and that oil companies and the United States government were involved in his death. Myers' patents are still available online, although as yet there has been no independent verification of his claims. March 21st, 1998. Yeah, Tesla was the real deal too. He was a man who was well ahead of his time, and like most people who were ahead of their time, he was discredited and systematically destroyed both financially and reputation-wise. If Tesla had been allowed to keep going with his work and bring what he found into the public domain, the world would look very different than the one we find ourselves in today. His technology would have created a real-life utopia, but seeing as the FBI confiscated all of Tesla's belongings, papers, and inventions, we're still relying on big oil and business. Alright, what else we got here? He died at 57 years old. So what happened to the water-powered car? Let me see if I can find out. After the oil embargo in 1973, Stan Meyer wanted to develop something to prevent the influence of oil-rich companies on America. Alright. What do we do here? Alright. Okay, let's do this. Let's go back to this recording. So they killed Stan Meyer at 57 years old, or he died. Do I think it was an accident? No, I don't believe it coincidence. Don't believe it. But his patents are still available. But have we been dumbed down so much that nobody out there has the ability? I asked people about the magnetic generator at the Tesla convention in Albuquerque a couple of years back. They were all afraid to do it. They were afraid the government would come after them, and they would.
Alloy rods, acting as electrodes, are housed in a perspex container that's filled with water. Normal mains voltage is fed in through a transformer, but critically, there is virtually no current consumed, less than half an amp. The result is dramatic. Hydrogen pours off with the flick of a switch. Meyer claims the key is his electronics, which pulses electricity rapidly across the rods at up to 20,000 cycles per second. In a way that's not readily apparent, this process transforms the equation. Whereas in conventional electrolysis, 3 times as much energy is consumed as is produced in the form of hydrogen fuel, in Meyer's apparatus, the reverse is true. It appears to produce several 100% more energy than it consumes.
Stan has something that's characteristic of the people that sound like they've done something to tap zero-point energy. Has high frequency, high voltage, and there's a combination of the two at which something occurs. With Chernetsky in Russia, it was what he called a self-sustaining discharge. The tube would run by itself. When Stan gets this effect, the amount of hydrogen and oxygen that are emitted off these two electrodes is a step function. It almost boils the water. If I did this with standard electrochemicals, I need current, and the water should rise a degree every couple of seconds. With Stan's, it'll run for a half hour, and the water temperature hasn't changed. Something's different.
Meyer demonstrates this repeatedly without any difficulty, and yet on the face of it, it represents an extraordinary revolution. His measurements over the years suggest 1,700% greater efficiency than conventional electrolysis. And if he's to be believed, he's getting much better results from his latest, still secret invention.
Well, I first got involved with Stan Meyer when I went over there with a couple of colleagues to look at his water-splitting device. And so we arrived at Stanley Mayer. He had a demonstration cell. We filled it with tap water. In fact, I did that myself. And he switched it on, and almost instantly there were 3 jaws dropped because of the rate at which the gas poured off. It was quite spectacular.
Whatever energy source Stan Meyer had tapped, it was not explicable by the electric power that was going into it. So something was powering it outside of conventional wisdom.
There is no question that the gas coming off in such abundance is hydrogen. Meyer ignites it to produce a high-temperature flame able to cut through metal.
Stanley Mayer has faced a lot of difficulties. He's 3 times tried to launch the device, produced press conferences at the technical press round, but he's been almost universally slated. In the early days, very much so, they just ridiculed the whole idea. He's getting a little more notice now because some scientists are getting interested. But by and large, science is very intolerant, particularly modern science.
As with Tesla, Griggs and others, Meyer's claims are so far outside the received scientific wisdom that they've been ignored by the majority of the scientific establishment. But then, Meyer has ignored them too. He has poured his energies over the last 10 years into establishing recognition for his claims by getting international patents.
In the processing, there was a great deal of difficulty in trying to process the legal paperwork in such a way as to allow the patent office to fully understand what was actually occurring. In one instant, we brought the water fuel cell to Washington, D.C., and of course I had tweaked it in such a way to produce an enormous amount of hydrogen and oxygen gas, and the patent examiner said, no, it will not work based on the electrolysis process. And when we turned it on and produced an enormous amount of hydrogen and gas, the examiner finally realized that we were doing exactly that, and went out in the hallway and started screaming and hollering to everybody on the floor, put out all your cigarettes, hydrogen's in the building. So we started laughing and said, well, we certainly convinced everybody in the patent office that we can do what we said we can do.
Even so, the US Patent Office dragged their feet for 3 years before granting patents on the hydrogen-producing device. Since then, against massive resistance, he's managed to get patents established throughout Europe and Japan. But the hydrogen machine was only the first step towards Meyer's ultimate dream. If he gets it right, this application of his technology would change the 21st century in the same way that the Wright brothers and Carl Benz transformed the 20th. He is currently modifying a beach buggy to run on nothing but water. It doesn't have a petrol tank or even a hydrogen container. It has just a tank of water. He's invented a device called a water splitter to replace the spark plug. As the water is injected into the engine, Meyer claims it's fractured into hydrogen and oxygen and then burned as fuel. Meyer is working on a kit to modify any engine. He hopes to demonstrate it on this car within 12 months.
And of course, the blessing to the use of the water as a fuel source, that on combustion, the byproduct is water mist. So we're even solving the environmental pollution problem at the same time that we're using water to maintain the industrial basis of the world.
Meyer is protective about his inventions to the point of self-confessed paranoia. Most observers describe him as a crank and his car as an aberration. But then madness and genius often go hand in hand. Meyer shares with many inventors a problem that goes well beyond paranoia. As an engineer with no scientific background, he faces a giant hurdle when he tries to communicate with scientists.
One problem is that the language that people use when they're trying to describe their inventions is not the language that I as a scientist am used to, and so I have to translate it, if you like, into a way that I can begin to understand what they're trying to say. It might as well be written in Swahili for all of the sense that it initially makes, and so I'm not particularly inspired to put a lot more effort in the hope that the pearl of wisdom will reveal itself to me. At a certain point you hit a law of diminishing returns.
It isn't just a question of the difficulties of communication. There is a profound barrier between scientists and inventors, and a strong reluctance on the part of most scientists to risk their reputations grappling with issues that don't have a clear scientific pedigree.
Reluctance to look foolish inhibits a lot of people from looking at things. This is looked at as a pariah. You touch it and it creates an image of you that you don't want your colleagues to see.
At one extreme you might have things that are guaranteed to work but are not very interesting if they do, and at the other extreme things that are a real long shot but would be revolutionary. And so you have to try and weigh the balance and decide which side is more likely to be profitable for you. Then, having made some choices, you then have to ask yourself, how do I actually go about doing this? Do I have to apply for funds to do it? And if I do, who will I be competing with? And what is the better chance that this will be supported or that? Because, at least in the big science area that I work, you can't just sort of come up with an idea on a Friday and expect to start the experiment on a Saturday. It takes many months, many years even, of preparation.
But though the scientific establishment may have ignored the likes of Meyer, the powerful military-industrial complex certainly hasn't. Over the past 10 years, Meyer says he's been quietly approached by many influential organizations who would never admit publicly to their involvement with him.
It is involved in deep space exploration, and it's also being developed quite highly in the military. Basically what occurred with water fuel cell was in the fact that once they understood was actually occurring, then under the U.S. national security mandate, I have no decision or power of whether or not the military or NASA or the federal government will utilize the technology. They can utilize it in any way they so desire.
NASA is using every method it can to regain some of its now fading glory. In the face of strong congressional resistance, the days of limitless budgets for space exploration have long since gone. As the champion of a new, environmentally friendly energy source, NASA would gain immense support.
Your identification, please. Do you have your identification?
As a former top scientist of the NASA Spaceplane project, Professor Paul Ziss has an inside track on the workings of the agency.
NASA has large centers. The center that's in charge of propulsion is NASA Lewis in Cleveland, Ohio. Can you imagine, instead of having a million-pound rocket has 900,000 pounds of fuel on board, an oxidizer. Can you imagine what it would be like if you could put a device on there that would split water and run it into your engines? No explosive compounds.
Public confirmation of a contract from NASA would provide a resounding boost for Mars technology. But Paul Ziss says it's only in a closed meeting that they confirm such an agreement.
They're looking for new energy sources. I understand from the people that I've talked with that they have worked with Stan and tried to understand what he's done and given him a contract. I also understand with the bureaucracy in Washington and the congressional oversight as to why they would never admit it. Anyone that does that will be suspect, will be challenged, will be considered a threat.
But if only a fraction of what Meyer claims for his technology can be achieved, it would represent a vindication for NASA's involvement. It would also be a powerful threat to many entrenched vested interests.
If Stan Meyer's device works like he advertises, you would make energy available universally almost free. That is a major, major, major impact.
when new technology comes in existence, there's a great resistance to it because it can affect a lot of economic factors. In this particular case in the United States, we pay roughly about $200 billion a year for foreign oil. It's quite obvious that the Arabs would pay $200 billion to try to keep this type of technology out of the economy. And many times over the last decade, I have been offered enormous amounts of money to simply sell out or to sit on it. The Arabs offer me well over $1 billion cold cash, simply to sit on and do absolutely nothing with it.
And so they killed him after this film was made. So the information you're getting from me today can't get no more. Ain't coming back. He ain't gonna be alive again. You need to, and keep in mind, folks, because I give you this kind of information, exactly the information that you've gotten today on my show here, they have tried to kill me before. They tried to destroy me, and they don't want you having any money. I've got a little bit of money today because one lady from North Texas bought some of my books, bought some of my videos, and bought some of my stuff.
That mainstream media won't tell you. Are you frustrated with your elected politicians? Get the news behind the news at truthradio.com. At Truth Radio, you can listen live or listen to a large selection of archived programs on demand. Listen when you want to. Truthradio.com. The truth is out there. All you have to do is open your mind.
And let's keep in mind who is bringing you this information, who is risking their life, his life, my life, to bring you this information, to bring you this caliber of shows, to bring you this caliber of information. And there's a number of ways you can get it. It's all pretty much free up on Facebook, Free American 69, YouTube, Free American 69, and freeamerican.com. Your orders help me get by, help me get gasoline, help me print cards, help me get this information out, and the more people we got supporting me, backing me, and listening to me, the better off you will be. Thank you. God bless.